time and time again when, as a result of natural disasters, where the mortality is much higher, whether in 2014, where in Solomon Islands, mortality amongst women and girls was around 94%. Again, in 2004, in Aceh, Indonesia, the mortality was also much higher, around 77% amongst women and girls. And this begs the question of why is this impact much higher? Why is there this, this disproportionate exposure to risk? And this merits us to think about how we do resilience differently. What are the key barriers that render this group of the population at higher risk exposure, which is founded in inequality of access to information, to resources, and entrenched barriers which put them in before a natural disaster hits or before an armed conflict starts at a disadvantaged position, because they're already struggling to meet ends meet. And comes the day after, they are the first to be impacted and the last to be compensated. Because when we think of post-disaster needs assessment, and we've done a review, only 30% have strong gender dimensions. Women mostly are in the informal sector, and that's their source of income. When you look at compensation packages, women are excluded, because which sector does not get recompensated is the informal sector. When you talk about female-headed households and family structures are changing, whether as a result of armed conflict or disasters or displacement, where we're seeing an increasing number of female-headed households in the millions in case of Iraq, and you look at the response. And the response thinks of women, let's think about them within the protection cluster. Let's provide psychosocial support and not enough focus on livelihood opportunities. So we have a disconnect between our understanding that there is heightened vulnerability amongst women and girls, and when we come to respond and talk about resilience, then we are not taking the time to address those gender dimensions of risk exposure, and how can we genuinely enhance the capacities and capabilities of women and these female households, headed households, to prepare to withstand and recover from crisis. Women's organizations are amongst the first responders in a community, and there is a lot of information that would not be necessarily there if women are not engaged, because they have this intimate knowledge of the needs of their community, but also they bring a different perspective. So we need to leverage their leadership. And the point I was making is that whether we think of disaster management, disaster planning, disaster risk reduction, we need to find a way where we can bridge this gap of underrepresentation of women's organization. Whether thinking of quotas and disaster management bodies, the bottom line, we need to ensure that there is representation and there's space and channels of participation for women to inform, but also to bring the intelligence around what kind of early warning systems should be in place. I was very interested to hear about the heat wave in France. The heat wave in France had a gender dimension because there were more mortality amongst older women. Well, maybe the early warning system did not use modalities that would give that information to older women. So this is what we mean. What we mean is that bring the perspectives of different segments of the population so they can inform a recovery effort. And this is also in the case of conflicts, armed conflicts, because women are a strong constituency for peace. They are a strong constituency to promote national reconciliation and counter radicalization, but they're constantly under leveraged. And they are a power to be reckoned with at the local community, with the moral voice they bring, but also their common desire to end the bloodshed, which in many cases transcends sectarian strife and divisions, which is something to be leveraged, really, if we are to talk about effective resilience and effective recovery. We need to support women's organizations, investing, and this whole talk about localization now within the Grand Bargain and the new way of working and the World Humanitarian Summit. And again, when we're talking about supporting local actors, who are those who are least engaged with, whether within the cluster system of humanitarian coordination, are usually women's organizations, and they are the ones who are closest to the community. So one way is to support first, the institutional capacities. Second, to support coalition building. So we really start to see them forming as coalitions, as a block of influence. And then to see how we can also encourage their participation, whether in response planning, in assessments, in risks assessments. And third is to see that we really are institutionalizing and supporting member states to institutionalize gender in governance, with all what that means, from plans to budgets, but also in terms of women representation. So it is a comprehensive package that we need to think about it, from building the women movement to supporting their organizations, to engaging with the governance institutions, so we have an institutionalized mechanism. So we move from a ticking the box exercise of we've talked about gender and we've talked to 2 women's organizations and we've done the job. Because this is, at the end of the day, a question of effectiveness. We want to target those who are most in need. We want to make recovery resilient. We cannot ignore half of the population who are at highest risk. Bangladesh is one of the examples, but there's so many examples where, when there was an opening for us to engage with women organizations, or when disaster management bodies have reached out, they've had very good intelligence on what key information points, what key modalities they need to use for their early warning systems. And one of the things that I heard from some of the colleagues in Bangladesh was around the issue of use of radio, and to reach more rural communities in early warning systems, and how that can actually save a lot of lives.